Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Real Talk with Rhi. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I would love to talk to you about giving ourselves grace, specifically as parents of neurodivergent children, children with additional needs, children on the spectrum, anyone dealing with neurospiciness within their family. And I specifically want to talk to you today about giving ourselves grace when we don't even know what we don't know yet. I'm going to tell you a little story and it's all going to make sense. So we have a tendency to be incredibly hard on ourselves. I think you guys find this too, because judging on my DMs, the comments I get, I think when parents have children with additional needs, they can become quite reflective. Oh, I should have looked at it this way. I could have helped more. What would have happened if I would have started this process earlier, whatever that might look like. And I want to talk about how I think we all go through this. I want to normalize it a little bit so that we can let go of it and ultimately be kinder to ourselves and also to those people in our lives who are not yet where we are on their level of understanding about the neurodivergent world. So, my children find it very hard to believe that I went to school in the last century. So as a baby of the 80s, I very much had my formative years in the 90s. If I'm honest, I suppose it was quite a long time ago. And when I hear things like it's the same time between, now and 1990 as, hang on, let me do the maths because it makes sense when you see it, doesn't it? Let me see, 2024 and 1994, is that the maths? Wow, 1994 and 1964. Oh, ouch, that hurt. You think of the 60s as a really long time ago, but yeah, oh, ouch. So in the late 90s, I'm in secondary school. Mobile phones are only just becoming a thing. And by phone, I do not mean phones the way our children think of them now. It was a phone that was just for phoning people. It was barely even for texting people. And if you did want to text people on your mobile phone, you had to press the number. Does everyone else remember? Let me know if you remember. You have to press the number over and over to get to a certain letter. And if you made a mistake, you had to delete it all. It was a whole thing. It took a long time. And I think my first mobile phone, I had 10 texts a month I could use, and barely anyone else I knew that had the facility to receive a text. It was about £1 squillion a minute. And you could use your mobile phone just about long enough to phone someone and say, can't talk long, I'm on my mobile. So really, if you actually wanted to speak to another human for more than a minute or two, you needed to call a landline. You need to hope that the landline is not engaged by another member of the family, because it was one landline per family. It was very rare people had more than one phone number, very sort of unheard of, really. So it was one landline. The whole family would have the same landline. And if it did ring, it was not engaged, you'd have to speak to someone's mum and say, hi, Mrs. So-and-so, can I please speak to whoever you want to speak to? And then we were approaching the end of the 90s, and I can't remember exactly when we got internet, but it was during my secondary school years towards the end of it. So I'm guessing late 90s. Now, I'm not saying other people didn't have internet before us. I think they probably did. And I don't know if there were faster options for internet, but I'm going to tell you what ours looked like. Our internet, and I think this was pretty standard, was you'd have to interrupt the phone line. You'd have to have a an engaged tone on the phone line, and then you would physically dial the internet and go, if you know the noise, you know. If you know, you know. If you don't know, then you're going to think that was really strange. But if you know, you know. And then every page that it took to load would take an eternity, an actual eternity. And I've got to say, the information when you actually got to the internet was pretty darn limited. So if you really wanted to learn about something, and this was pretty much still true even when I was first a parent, if you wanted to really learn about something, you needed to buy a book on it. And generally, certainly in my teen years, maybe in early adulthood, you just go to your local, say, Waterstones, and hope they had the book that you were after, and that inside that book were all the answers to the questions you had. So if you had a problem about, I don't know, your child, and you were worried about them not sleeping enough, not eating enough, whatever, you just have to hope that the right book was there and it was in stock, and then it had all the answers. And this was the case for learning about pretty much anything. And let's not even get me started about like messaging within schools. So in the 90s, we were told about academic stuff. Our pastoral care, well, I think we had a lesson called pastoral, like it was once a month or something, but it was just, we were in our form rooms and talking for an hour. It's like, it was a time they'd give us out letters or whatever. They didn't really teach us much about diversity or mental health or anything at all, actually, other than academic stuff. We were taught basic academic stuff. We were told off if we did not behave and conform in a way that the school expected us to. And mental health issues, neurodivergence, anything like this was just unheard of. It just was never brought up. It was not brought up in an official capacity. And ultimately, the people I knew of with any, say, struggles or difficulties, I can't think of a single person that I knew of in school that had been diagnosed with ADHD. Not one. Were there people in school with me at the time that had ADHD, or is it new? I mean, 100% there were people with ADHD. Had they been diagnosed? No. And if they had been diagnosed, I didn't know about it. It was not something discussed or normalized. If anyone did have ADHD and they knew about it, they were keeping that to themselves. Now, there were a number of people that had been diagnosed with dyslexia, although there were a huge wave of people that were kind of my year in school, the year above, the year below, the sort of same age group, that went undiagnosed with dyslexia until they got to university. And then there were this huge bout of people getting diagnosed with that. But equally, I know of some people who, so dyslexia was probably the most normalized struggle then that I was aware of at the time. There were even people back then who had awareness that there may be dyslexia at play and whose parents told them not to say anything, and that they didn't want even the school to know. So they'd go from one school to another and they didn't want the new school to know that there might be dyslexia at play because they didn't want them discriminated against, I guess. So I think the reason I'm telling you this very long-winded and convoluted story is that I think when then I became a parent and I first started seeing signs that I now know were signs of autism, I have to be very kind to myself in the way that I think of my past self. Because now, when I look back with my 2020 hindsight, and I look back and I'm like, wow, that was so obvious. Why didn't you just know what that was? Why didn't you react to that sooner? Why didn't you deal with that better? We've got to remember that as a culture at the time, as a society at the time, these things were not talked about. They were not discussed. People were not having the awareness. And I'm talking about not just like the teenagers were not discussing it. I don't think the adults, the teachers, were noticing these signs and picking up on these difficulties these kids were having. So I only knew of one person during my school education that had autism. This person was, I'm going to say, might have been 10, maybe 10 plus years younger than me. And this person had like undoubtedly had autism, but also had a number of other global delays and a number of other challenges, deficiencies and struggles on top of autism. And this person had quite extreme difficulties. So this person needed around the clock one-to-one care, was entirely nonverbal, and was just very unlikely to ever be able to be able to live independently as an adult. That was kind of the thoughts from the people caring for this person. So ultimately, nothing had been discussed in school. We hadn't been taught about anything. So the adults teaching us probably didn't even know about it themselves. And the one person that I knew of with autism presented in this quite extreme way with lots and lots of difficulties, a number of which were from other things that were not necessarily directly attributed to autism. So when then I had children and I look back through my memory and I can see there were signs, there were indications long before I knew what they were, long before I took action, long before I was able to support my children, properly in the way they needed. I've got to give myself a little bit of grace in that I just didn't know. And it wasn't that I was being ignorant. I mean, was I being ignorant? What's the definition of ignorance? Not knowing? I don't know. But I didn't even know what I didn't know. So it wasn't like, oh, I had heard of this term autism. I thought, well, I really should learn more about that. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And this is very much a learning curve thing. When you're a beginner at something, you don't know what you don't know. And then you get a little bit further into it and you realize how much you really don't know. You realize you are like consciously incompetent. You realize there's this whole world of stuff and you think, how am I ever going to learn all this? And then as you learn more and more, you become more consciously competent in knowing about whatever that subject is. And I can definitely feel myself having moved through this cycle. The more I have learnt about autism, the more I have learnt about neurodivergence generally, and the more I've been able to support my children. Am I an expert? Do I know everything there is to know? Absolutely not. I am learning about this stuff every single day, and the new layers and the new nuances. And I think we all are. And I think ultimately, even the experts, the actual experts, the doctors studying this at a deeper level are still learning more every day about autism, neurodivergence generally. So we do have to be super kind to ourselves when we think of ourselves at the beginning of our journeys, where we first were presented with signs that our children may have these difficulties. A lot of us will have gone, oh, that's nothing. You will have heard yourself in the past, or other people say these things when these signs first come up. Oh, yeah, my child, talking about your child, oh, they're just quirky, or oh, I know they've got difficulties, but we're fine. And I think a classic one that I've heard so many people say, and I can hold my hand up, I've said this myself, is, oh, they're somewhere on the spectrum, but as long as we do X, Y, Z, they're fine. And the first of my children to be diagnosed was actually my second born child. And I'm going to be honest with you, I cannot remember, and I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, I cannot remember the exact time where I thought, oh, we could be dealing with autism here. I can't remember what piece of information it was. I can't remember if it was a conversation, something I read. I just can't remember. I think it was a very gradual understanding that my child had more challenges than another, an average child of their age. And I've got to say, the challenges that he had back then compared to how he is now, if I could go back in time and talk to myself when I had all those concerns, when I started to become aware of them and I was just becoming more and more concerned, and I knew that he was fine as long as I was there putting everything in place, and I was really concerned about him starting school, and because I wouldn't be there to make sure that everything that made his day go okay would be there. If I could go back and talk to that version of me now and tell her how, with everything we've put in place, how well he's doing now, how much he's thriving, how you just need to keep going with it. You need to persist. You need to keep learning. You need to never stop learning. You need to keep pushing. You need to keep pushing back when the powers that be, the people that want to do the assessments, kind of belittle how you're feeling, kind of make you feel like you're a bit crazy because they have done that. And you need to keep pushing. You need to keep the faith. You need to know that everything you're doing is ultimately going to pay off. And although, I'm not going to say there's never going to be struggles ever, that ultimately he's doing so well and you're going to be so proud, and just keep going. So we have been shoulding all over ourselves. Yes, shout out to any other Sex and the City fans that remember that episode where Sarah Jessica Parker's saying we're shoulding all over ourselves. I've always liked that I've always liked that series, and I've always liked that term. But I think it's so easy now to go back and be like, I should have seen this sooner. I could have done more. What would have happened if I'd done this? And I especially struggle with our eldest, and the feelings of guilt coming up there, because he was diagnosed last. He was our eldest child and yet diagnosed last. But ultimately, I can look back now and think, I should have noticed sooner. I should have done this, and then I could have gotten more help, and that would have made life easier. But if it hadn't been for the lessons I'd learned from the other three, then I never could have had the information to notice the patterns, notice the necessity for him to get assessed. And I'm a big believer in cycle breaking, a big believer of apologizing to our children and being accountable for our actions. And I think our parents' generation's very much like adults are right, children wrong. I actually think that perhaps if we can show our children that everyone has challenges and we all just, get up in the morning and do our best, that's a much healthier message. And if we can be accountable to our children and we can apologize to them when we feel we're in the wrong, then hopefully they won't have as much healing to do from their childhood as people of my generation. Hello, fellow millennials. I had to Google that, by the way. I'm a millennial. But fellow millennials have perhaps a little more healing to do. And hopefully if we can apologize to our children as we go, we can help them heal as they go from the mistakes that we'll inevitably make because we're human, then they'll have less healing to do it themselves as an adult. So I have talked to our eldest at length and apologized for not noticing sooner, for not having the understanding that the little ones benefited from, because I just didn't know. I didn't know, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I've got to be honest, I grew up with sisters, and my general opinion when I had the first two, which are both boys, was, wow, like, I absolutely love you. I love you with all of my being. I would kill for you, I would die for you, but boys are weird and I don't understand you. The things you do, I just don't get. And I can now see that these things that I didn't understand at the time, I couldn't have understood at the time, a lot of them can be attributed to neurodivergence. And that's why those things didn't make sense to me, just because I didn't understand. So ultimately, why do I talk about autism, ADHD, neurodivergence, neurospicy things on my podcast, on YouTube, on Instagram? Why do I discuss all these things? It's for a few reasons. Ultimately, I want to say the things that I wish I could nip back in a time machine. I could pinch the DeLorean and drive to 88 miles an hour. Shout out if you know which film I'm talking about. So I'm going to drive to 88 miles an hour and go back in time. And the things I wish I could say to myself at that point in time where I'm needing a little nudge, I'm having realizations, I'm feeling a little lost. And then as we move through the process, I'm feeling very lost. I'm becoming aware that there are difficulties. I don't know what to do. I need to learn. There's so much information to take in. I realize how much I don't know. I realize what a challenge the whole diagnosis process is going to be. I realize how much fighting there's going to be. I'm exhausted and I'm worried. I want to go back and say to that version of myself, it's all going to be okay. And those are the things I want to say. And since I probably am not going to find a DeLorean and be able to drive to 88 miles an hour, if I can't say them to her, hopefully I'm going to say them to some of you, and it'll have the impact that it would have had if I could have said those words to my younger self. And ultimately, my learning curve and the things that I've managed to pick up along the way, hopefully I can help you guys take some shortcuts and get the information in a slightly quicker way. Be kinder to yourselves and stop beating yourselves up a little bit quicker. And hopefully I will continue to learn, and I continue to learn from a lot of people in this community, and I am far from done learning. I'm still learning every day. But if I can have compassion for myself back then, and then hopefully me in the future will have compassion for the current version of me who is very much still learning, and I can have compassion for this current version of me that is currently still learning, then I feel that's very important. And the other reason I feel it's so important to discuss all of this on my podcast, on YouTube, on the internet, is understanding is just so powerful. If I'd had that understanding, I would have got to where I was going with being able to get things in place for the children quicker. If the people in my life, the family members who were less than understanding, and this is probably a chat for another day, but we definitely had challenges from people within our lives, within the family, when the A word was first mentioned, and it's like, okay, we might be dealing with autism here. The reactions were, let's just put it, less than helpful. And if people have come across information about autism and neurodivergence generally, it's possible that then when one of their children is identified as having challenges, they will be able to process that better. Maybe it won't be any of their children or direct family. Maybe it'll be a friend. Maybe it'll be a more distant relative, like a niece, or maybe their children are neurotypical and are never going to have to deal with these exact challenges. But ultimately, you can help your children understand the challenges that inevitably their classmates may face, their friends may face, people in their clubs may face, other adults in their life may face. Hopefully they can be more understanding, and hopefully we as parents can then be more understanding to our friends who are also parents, who are going through these things. So even if we're not going through these things ourselves, we can not put our foot in our mouth and say the wrong things. And I just think demystifying it, talking about it, normalizing the world of neurodivergence, the importance of that cannot be underestimated, which is why I'm going to keep talking about it. And I hope that is helpful to some people. I hope that some of the things I'm saying will be healing in the way that I wish someone had been able to say those things to me and had been able to help me heal. That's my hope. That's my hope. So if you want some more of that, then make sure you are subscribed to this podcast. If you're listening in your ear holes and you are enjoying the podcast, I would love it if you would leave me a review. That would really, really help to support the podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, then please do subscribe. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know where you are in your journey. Who in your life do you know of that is on the spectrum, dealing with autism, ADHD? You don't have to use names, but is it someone in your immediate family? Is it someone you work with? I guarantee you there's someone. And if you think it's no one, you don't know of anyone, then chances are it's just that you're not aware yet, or they're not aware yet. I can't think of anyone that doesn't know anyone dealing with these struggles. You probably know a lot of people that are undiagnosed and so far unaware of the symptoms. I know I do. And the more you learn about it, the more you can kind of see that going on in your life. But I just want this to be a community where we can support each other. We can normalize these things and hopefully make the world a little bit of a better, if not a much more understanding place in the process. So thanks for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk with Rhi. I will see you guys in the next one. If you're on YouTube, there is another video I'd love you to watch on screen now. And if you are listening via your favorite podcast provider, that review would be very much appreciated. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.